I have some notes because this type of topic kind of stray away after a while, so I just had to remember what I want to say for each slide. So hi, my name is Serra, and I work at Ericsson. I'm heading up a unit that is driving Enterprise 2.0 adoption within our company. And what is Enterprise 2.0 for Ericsson? Well, it's collaboration, knowledge sharing, and also networking. So we're kind of combining them all into one. So I thought that was important to say because you can have different interpretations of Enterprise 2.0. For you that doesn't know Ericsson, this is a slide that we usually present. What's normally interesting or what we talk a lot about is our market share and our patents and our products and everything like that. In this context, though, the important part is how many employees we are, how global we are. We're in 180 countries. And also when we started, because that brings some sort of sense into the legacy that we're working with, which is 1876. So we have a lot of processes, a lot of legacy and IT systems and everything in place, and there's a big change going on right now within this company. And you can interrupt me whenever you want if you have questions. So what is the challenge? Well, we are a multi-organization. We have different cultures, and not just cultures depending on which country we're in. It's actually different cultures in different professions and in which process you work and so forth. We have different business models. We have everything from developing products to working with services and also with installations and rollout and everything like that. So we have all the different challenges you have within these areas. And Andrew talked about being out in the field in different places when the installation engineers is out there trying to install base stations and antennas. I mean, they're everywhere. So we have the same challenges, but we also have the challenge with having people in-house working, researching and developing things. So we have all the branch of that. We talked a bit about, earlier you got some questions of the intranet and the corporate communication and that type of things. Well, in a big company, you would preferably actually want to have communication steered, because otherwise you get a lot of confusion. You want the same messages to come to the people in the right time and so forth. Having these type of social tools available makes that virtually impossible, because you will get the messages out there and it might differ and it might be confusing. So that needs to be taken into consideration and also allow that to happen, which is really difficult because it's losing control in some very vital areas. So a lot of companies have a fear of that, and communication departments have a fear of that. And I totally understand why, because it is a problem. But it's also a problem you have to deal with, because the messages will go out there internally in the company, or they will use external channels, because communication is key for a lot of people. Well, using the right tone of voice in a company where you do have different cultures and the native language is not English for most of those people. But English is actually our corporate language, being a Swedish company, so that makes sense. But I mean, we wouldn't force people to learn Swedish because it's not that big language. So we have English, and that kind of also have a lot of challenges in a global company, which I guess you all recognize that have working global companies, is that people get a little bit scared of contributing or participating, and you get a lot of readers, and you get very few people that is actually contributing. So that's also a challenge of how to make the whole company participate into your social world. And that's digital, and everyone can see what you write, which is a little bit scary for a lot of people. But then the biggest challenge we actually have is the constraints we have in local countries with laws with unions, security, and the legal part of this is a bit of a struggle because we have different levels in different countries. And at the same time, we have expectations from the users because most of our users is of course out on the internet already in some way and expect this to happen inside the company, but then the company have other laws to actually consider, which means that we cannot move as fast as we might want to do. And also, I think in all right is that there are some countries where you are more worried about what the corporate is doing than other countries because it's a cultural thing. And we can actually misuse the information we get from our employees. So that needs also to be very clear what the company intends to do with the information you share, especially information around yourself. So that's a very important part, and that takes time. And the last bullet, I mean, this is the key. We're working in an area where anyone, any day, can choose an external tool. That will not happen when you work within CRM or your financial systems and so forth, because you really need to use the corporate tools. But here, if they don't like what you bring to the table, they will leave and they will use something else, which then will be even worse from a security point of view. And also, keeping knowledge in the corporation. Any questions on that? What we did was that we looked at ourselves at 2006, something like that. Said, okay, we have all these local initiatives going on everywhere. We've been online since the 90s, basically. And a lot of customer portals, a lot of interactions within the company, a lot of mailing, distribution lists, so forth. And we tried to look at, okay, so where are we? What do the company want in the future? And this is really important. So I put 4 things below on this slide that might be interesting. These might be different in different companies. They might be in different order. But I think if you don't know this about your company, it would be really difficult to actually adopt the enterprise level of this type of strategy and implement it. Because you need to connect it to the business needs. Where do the company really want to go in the way they want to work and operate? How ready is the people in the company to embrace this type of way of working? Technical readiness, the ICT enablers. In a global company, that's key. If we don't have the right technical level, it will be difficult to drive the adoption. And 4th, this might come as one in some companies. So it's the leadership and the process readiness. And it depends also on the strategy you have. Will your social tools be part of your normal way of working? Or will it be something you will do on the side? We took a conscious decision that this was the way that Ericsson is going to work in the future. Therefore, we needed to connect it to our business processes and our leadership. If you're going to lead, and this is actually not something that we took a decision on. This was the way the company actually were heading. So that helped us, though. So what we did was we started with all the local initiatives. We created an enterprise strategy, which was around 2006, 2007. In that strategy, we also looked at how will we manage this, because this is a joint effort for all the group functions. You have organizational development, you have business development, you have operational development, and you have strategy development. So we created a framework, and we made that part of our normal business processes. And then we are working with facilitation. We're not managing, we're facilitating, which is a bit different from maybe when you implement different processes and support for processes. But we're looking at facilitation mainly. And then we have a strategy execution program, which is actually starting this year. So it takes time in a big company, but we have come a long way even though we haven't done a formal strategy execution program. And then we have a platform that's being developed as we move along. And I thought it was interesting, the last presentation, because we have chosen completely different ways to implement this, but it was really interesting because we are actually aiming for the same thing, I think. But we have decided to have our own platform and develop that, even though it's based on normal products from outside. But we're also developing communication products ourselves, so we're actually combining all of it right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the framework and the facilitation, because I think that is what is actually driving this forward. And the framework we have, we call it a framework, is like we have identified activities that are common, regardless if you work with marketing and sales, supply, product development. There are some activities that you do that's very similar. So the framework is on a very high level, and it's more targeting different things like sharing and creating things, or preparing yourself. And preparing, you can do that, and you can do it on different levels, as a person, as a team, as an organization. And then we connect it, and we're working with each process driver for each of the core processes to see where can we go in and support. And it's actually more about ways of working than what it actually is introducing new tools. So that's why it's really important to see that everything we do is not on top of everything else you do, it's instead of. So it's always trying to see, are we making sense with what we're introducing? Or are we creating more work for people that's already stressed? So that is an important discussion we have with both the functions or the units that are working themselves, or with the process owners. And there's a lot of, since we have a lot of legacy, there is a lot of things that you have created due to the fact that you had to do it that way previously. So it's also important to challenge all the old ways of doing things and see, can we make it more efficient with this new way of working? And some processes are more in front of others, and that's just the way it is in a big company. So we're more focusing on those that are already there and realizing that this is a really good thing. And by doing that, you also look into what type of business needs you have. It's kind of an assessment in the company that you are trying to see, okay, what's the pain points that you have today? Will anything of that be solved with working in a new way? There are a lot of things that is pain points in a big company, of course, but some of it will actually be helped by introducing this new way of working and these type of tools. And then we do measure, but I will come back to that later on. And then it's focused on people. User experience, and user experience. And that's also something that's a little bit of a struggle when you have huge systems that are not really focusing on everyone to use them. So we try to look at putting them in the back end and having more a front end for most of the people. So key success factors for us has been an enterprise-wide participation and the transparency. And that's interesting in itself because you're actually closing the gaps in the hierarchies. And that is also something when you do the adoption or you drive a change that in the traditional way you would assign people in the local regions to have drivers and they would connect to the global program and so forth. But at this point, people are expecting to be able to participate in the global program right away. They don't want to have anyone in between. And that's good, and it's a challenge. So And then the common strategic direction shared in the company. This is a very different way of working than previously, which means that you are doing a lot of change for the core corporate and how we do things. And if you have different ideas, as I said previously, if you have business development, they're looking at a whole different way of driving things. HR and the organizational development, they're looking at something completely different. And IT is driving a whole different path. It will be very, very difficult to make this happen on a global scale. You will be very late and you will get more local initiatives and you will not get the utilization that you want from a global company. And we want to utilize our global scale because we have people all over the world. They're very talented. We have 82% knowledge workers within Ericsson, which is really interesting, and you would really like them to be able to share and meet somewhere. That's why facilitation is so important. So we have an open user group. Anyone within Ericsson can contribute, they can go in, they get extra information. Are we utilizing that the way we want to at this point? No. We see a lot of things we can do by having a closer cooperation with this group. But we're trying to break the silos that you have. And that's interesting because we want people to talk to each other and maybe not go through us and then to someone else. We want them to talk to each other, basically. The assessment I talked about is also people readiness. So we have everything from people that really think the way we're doing things today is perfect. And then you have those that are early adopters and they're gone. they just think we're so late and nothing happens. And then we have everything in between. And you need, in a global company, you really need to manage all of those. But you need to focus on the ones that are that's behind the early adopters. The early adopters, they're going to do whatever they need to do, and they will be really fast in adopting things. But then you have the part of the company, which is actually most of the part of the company, where people think, this is really great, and we realize this gives us value, but we don't understand how we should work in this new way. And that's where the facilitation comes in, to see how can we support them and give them new ideas of to do things. We also have, as many global companies, people travel a lot. And they are traveling all over the world and meeting up and discussing things. And we have our own collaboration tools, which is more real-time tools where you have video and conferencing, that type of things. So that's something we're actually now starting to get into the genes, basically, of our employees, that it's very good to meet up, but you can actually do it through video. And that's taking off very well at this point. Another thing that we talked about, or that at least was part of the agenda I had, is the culture and how do we drive culture. Well, you can never change culture. You can influence culture, doing things that will make people change or behave in a different way. And the way we implemented like our social networking tool is that we invited 500 people that we knew were going to set a tone. And that's not because we had an idea this is exactly what you're going to do. But we knew these were people that were very active in social media already. They had a very interesting comments. They had a high level of their business knowledge. So they contributed a lot on a scale where we thought would be interesting. So that would set the scene for others coming in. So those 500 persons were online and already active before we started to adopt in the rest of the company. Yes?
How did you identify the 500 people, and where were they dispersed, and how did you kind of come to that decision as to who would be included in that kind of early adopter program, essentially?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we have had collaboration tools and discussion forums previously to adopting the social networking tool. So we looked through those and looked at which community of practices were very active and what people contributed a lot. But also we had a problem with an external social networking tool called Yammer, a very aggressive company, and we saw a lot of people going into Yammer and have good discussions, but definitely nothing we wanted them to have externally. So we targeted them and discussed with them what we thought was suitable or not to actually share on an external tool. And then we invited them instead to become early adopters in the internal one. Because there was nothing wrong with actually what they were doing. I mean, they worked the way that we wanted to implement in our own company. So we didn't want to go there and say you're doing something wrong. It's just that you're not doing it at the right place. So please just move over to the internal one. And that's how so we didn't decide first that we should have 500 persons. It just happened to become that many that we could identify. And they were, which were really good, they were from all over the place. So that was also really good. Yes?
As a big company, I assume you have a large middle management layer, rock solid. Can you share any secrets how you got them either just giving the legitimation or even moving on collaboration platform?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. Just as the way that we have the early adopters and the people that don't want to change, you have the same characteristics on the middle management only as well. You have some that are really positive to this and some that really, really don't like it. And we targeted actually the positive ones first. And we're hoping that they would influence those that didn't really understand it. So when you talked, we were out talking to a lot of management teams and describing the strategy and the way forward. And I think Ericsson has a culture. This is what I meant with the 4 things that you need to look into, if the business readiness, people readiness, that type of things. Ericsson is a very networking company before this. They have a very sharing culture as a company. And we just used that and said, you can do this in a much better way. And now you can actually share between units, between countries, which is much more efficient. So that got some of them aboard. I think what happened since 2 years back helped us tremendously, which is that Ericsson decided to change their brand into something much more like social-like. So we are driving something called networked society today, which is actually the aim for the company is to ensure that the world can communicate with each other. So that helps because we're more connecting our strategy to our own brand and to what the company wants to become in the future. So when we started in 2006, 2007, I think we somewhat influenced the top management as well, because the top management within Ericsson were never the problem at all. They really liked this, and they thought knowledge sharing and collaborating and creating virtual teams was really, really important for the future of the company. And also the sense that we really want to involve our customers much earlier in a much easier way. Also opening basically doors to what the company wants to become. But middle management is, of course, I mean, when you connect it to business processes, that's the interesting part, and you start talking about knowledge sharing. And in our sense, when we talk about innovation, what we would like to do is to see that the innovation part where you have ideas and everything, and you find your peers in the company, that you can start up innovation projects, basically self-organizing. And it's interesting because you're actually asking the managers to give away their resources or time, and that is what what sometimes is a little bit losing control, and they don't realize that they will probably get resources or time from other sources because they're looking at a specific problem, and maybe you don't have the skills in your team. You can actually go and ask some other team if they can support you. And that, I think, has been a challenge because everyone has so much to do, so you don't want to get rid of any resources because you have all this stuff and the deadlines and everything, and then you're scared because people will go and help someone else. And so you need to find a way to work with rewards and contribution in that sense. And the last thing I think also is really important is that you should lead by example. So if you can get top managers to actually contribute and work in a good way, and you get skilled experts to share and show that this is the way we want to do things, that's really important as well. So measurements. Something I think most companies struggle with, and I think it's more connected to the investments you need to do to get this up and running. What justify the investment? And we looked at two parts, which is the business and employee. And at least in our company, we realized that we cannot do with just one. We need both. Because you have to get the motivation of the people, because the people is actually the one that will drive this. It will make no sense to have social collaboration and work in a collaborative way unless you have employees that are participating. So you need to figure out what is the motivator for the people to be there. And you need to make sure that whatever you're doing is supporting what you intend to do for the company. So we decided to have 4 layers. We have an operational level, which is the platform KPIs. The two in the lower part is basically where you start off with, because the operational KPIs could be something like performance on the tools, functionality for releases, like you have decided on a roadmap and when things will come, so you can look at that, which is more enablers. Usage data, that's where I think most companies are today. And it's actually where you have to start. It's the statistics. So you look at how many contributions, how many blogs, how many comments, how many ideas, how many. And you need that because it's a real, you need all the 4 layers, so nothing is wrong, definitely not. And it depends on where you want to be in the company. And the usage data is really important because that's how you can see the adoption rate. And you can see, if you divide that so you can split it up into countries, organizations, professions, it will be easier for you to actually target those that are falling behind or where you see that you would like to see more activity, and you can target that instead of trying to target the whole company all the time. So that usage data is really, really important, and we started off with contributions and reuse targets. We still have that for some organizations where that makes sense, where the maturity is to actually just get the people up and running and start to work in this way. But once you have got to a certain point, you want to start looking at the quality. And that's where you go into social analytics and combine that with your business scorecard or your normal business targets. And the social analytics is more interesting now because you start to be able to look at the competence in the company. New competence is coming up in different locations, and then how that will be supported, and where you can find people, especially if you start looking into new technology areas, for instance, that we might be doing, you can see that, oh, they're really strong in that country, maybe we should combine those resources with those in another place. And you might not have known that, because most of the skills in that level, you cannot find that in the HR systems, because it's on a too low level. You will never be able to follow that up. So what the social part is, they're contributing with skills that are much closer to actual actions. While in the HR systems, you have, on top of that, you have the professional roadmap, basically, and then on a much higher level. But you can never update that in the tempo that you need to do to be able to find those skills that has to do with specific releases or so forth. And what we have done last year is two things. We've done a barrier analysis, which is connected to the two top ones, which is more trying to see if we can get the social analytics to connect to our business KPIs. And then we've done something that we call digital workplace maturity assessment. Because what we found in the end was that we cannot have social tools over here. We need to have an integrated platform with all the business processes, tools, and everything. So we actually now start targeting, instead of saying Enterprise 2.0 or social applications, we're actually saying digital workplace in the future for your employees. So you connect the mobility and the devices and the connectivity and everything into your social experience and collaborative way of working. And the barrier analysis, to go on the top two, is actually going into a specific function, like a business unit or a region, looking at the balanced scorecards they have and the targets they have. And then they choose one that they would like to see if this can be improved by social applications and this collaborative way of working. And then what we do is a survey for those that are working, that they have identified. They identify target, we look at, okay, what activities support this target? And then we look at how those activities are actually being executed. And what's interesting from our point of view is to see who are the key persons. What are the key information and knowledge? And how do the people interact with each other? And then we also now can benchmark between same type of functions to see if there's any difference in how they work. So we don't choose the scorecard target for them. They choose what they really would like to address. And then we support them with an analyze and a method to do that. And the aim is to now, we have trained 50 knowledge managers out in the different parts of the world to actually be able to do this on a local level as well. So that's really interesting, because you can actually see where you have the pain points, and they're really surprised as well, because when you go in and do this type of barrier analysis, they think we're going to talk about social tools, and what we really talk about is their way of working. And they get a lot of findings just understanding which people they're actually interacting with, and which people they're not interacting with that maybe they should. So that's also really interesting. On the lower two parts, we've done this digital workplace maturity assessment, and that's looking at 9 KPIs or performance targets, which is looking at findability, which is, we found in the barrier analysis, the findability was something that were lacking. They thought they couldn't find what they really needed when they needed it. So in the workplace part, we looked at search, we looked at connect to business tools, we looked at business intelligence and so forth. And yes?
Do you face any difficult discussions with legal, workers' councils, or even employees saying that's Big Brother?
Yes, we do. So I have an advisory board connected to me with legal and with security and HR. But I also been introducing the strategy to the union representatives. And now we're trying to figure out where we can have the balance. The problem is more that they are on different levels. Some really don't want us to do this, and some want us to really go ahead and do it because they see benefits for their employees, because they will get more exposure in the company. So, but it's definitely something you need to address. We also looked in the digital workplace part, we also looked at characteristics, profiling, and what type of connectivity you have, devices, and so forth, and also seeing where you are at this point and where you actually would like to be. That gives us an indication of where we should put more emphasis on which tools. So search, for instance, we saw there was a huge gap between where you are today and where you would like to be. Then we know that's something we should make sure that we target. Sorry, 5 minutes, okay. Okay, but the employee part is not that difficult. You have the social part, and I think that's where we actually are easiest recognize what things could be really interesting for each individual. So last slide. This is a lot of information, but it's more where we are today. So we have the strategic program. We're working with facilitation. We look at ways of working, and we have an ICT platform that we are enabling all these things. And we have 90,000 users per month. We have 25,000 collaboration sites and community practices, 10,000 project sites, 20,000 ideas. The interesting part is 1 out of 40 ideas are actually implemented. We have 100,000 meeting hours per month in our virtual tools, and we have 700 blogs. Questions? Everything's crystal clear. Yes?
Are you operating entirely in English only, or do you allow local language?
That's the debate internally, because we do know that there are some locations where you need to have, for instance, HR information in a local language. But in these tools, we prefer English. And the good thing is that employees are correcting each other. So what comes up is like, could you please say this in English so we can see if we can help you? So they're kind of moving forward by just having interactions themselves. So until this point, we haven't had to put any guidelines in there. If you want help from the company, you need to place it in English. Yes?
You mentioned about the knowledge managers and that you train them to do the barrier analysis. Can you give us like more description of what exactly knowledge managers do in your organization? I mean, their job descriptions or their responsibilities?
Well, I guess that's a longer answer than 5 minutes. But mainly what they're doing is that they are supporting a way of working where collaboration and knowledge sharing is essential, basically. So they are out facilitating, putting up targets, working with each local management team. Some of them are part of the local management teams. The job description is very much like, if you do have assets, you treat information and knowledge as assets. And this the asset management of that, making sure that people understand how to do things, what to do, and so forth.
Time for one more question.
Have you defined an external social media policy in your corporation? So the use of Facebook and the use of, typically you can get them off the Yammer, you can't get them off the Facebook often because, parallel routes, the Ericsson route that might not even be set up by Ericsson.
Yeah.
How do you manage those type of discussions for employees, by the way?
Sorry?
The outside world, not the employees.
Yeah. No, we don't. I mean, we look at it, and it's more of a corporate communication. It's normal external communication, actually, and the way we we work in external world. It's just that it happens to be social media.
But you don't do sentiment analysis around what people are saying, perhaps?
Sometimes. I think Sony Ericsson, our previous joint venture, which we're not part of anymore, had more things like that because you had a lot more exposure in the common discussions around our products as phones. But I mean, there's not that many discussions on our base stations, or maybe our customers do, but maybe we should take a look.
Great. I just wanted to pick up on one thing from that session. I think it was summarised as right behaviour, wrong place. And I think that's, for everybody in the room, I think that's a really important thing to think about in terms of your strategy. So we see lots of examples of business units and even individuals taking it upon themselves to subscribe to not consumer services, but the enterprise services that, for example, are hosted in the cloud. And they're very, very easy to sign up to. The problem is that can lead to fragmentation, and it can lead to, a separation in terms of the platforms. It is something to think about, and I'm not sure necessarily there's a right answer, but you've got a room full of people around you who are facing that same challenge. So again, I encourage you during the coffee break that's coming up and throughout today and tomorrow, it's a great question to go and ask the other people in the room, how do you embrace that? Some companies are saying, we want to embrace, we want to use those external technologies, and that's absolutely a valid strategy. But for organisations that are looking to deploy based on internal technologies, bear in mind that it is very easy for individuals and for groups to sign up to these external services. So as I said, think about it as right behaviour, wrong place. Maria, thank you for that session. Very interesting, very informative.